The red and blue lights hit your rearview mirror out of nowhere. Your stomach tightens before your brain even catches up. You glance at your speed, your hands, the road ahead. Did I miss a sign? Was I speeding? Is something wrong with my car? You pull over, engine still running, heart beating just a little faster than normal. The officer steps out of the patrol car slowly, deliberately, like they've done this 1,000 times. Because they have. Then it happens. Step out of the vehicle. Just like that. No explanation, no build-up, just a command. And in that moment, most people don't think, they react. Let me ask you something before we go any further. Have you ever been in a traffic stop where the officer told you to step out of your car and you didn't know whether you actually had to do it or not? I want you to think about that for a second, and if you've experienced it, you should share what happened in the comments. Because what you felt in that moment, confusion, pressure, maybe even fear, that's exactly what we're going to unpack here. And more importantly, there's something most drivers don't realize about that exact moment, something that can completely change how the situation unfolds if you handle it correctly. Now let's slow this down, because this is where people get themselves into trouble without even realizing it. When an officer tells you to step out of the car, it feels like a turning point. The situation suddenly escalates, even if nothing dramatic has happened yet. Your mind starts racing. Am I being arrested? Did I do something serious? Why do they want me out? But here's the reality most people don't fully understand. In the United States, officers generally do have the legal authority to order you out of your vehicle during a lawful traffic stop. That principle comes from court decisions that prioritize officer safety during roadside encounters. So if your instinct is to argue right then and there, no, I don't have to get out, that's not the move you think it is. That's where people make their first mistake. They confuse, I have rights, with, I should challenge authority in the moment. Those are not the same thing. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. Even though you may have to comply with the order to step out, what you say before you do it matters more than most people realize. And I mean that literally. The words you choose in that exact moment can shape everything that happens next. How the officer treats you, whether the interaction escalates, and even how things look later if the situation ends up in court. So let's get very practical. The officer says, step out of the vehicle. There's a brief pause. Maybe you hesitate. Maybe you look at your hands. Maybe you glance in the mirror again. This is where you speak. Not aggressively, not sarcastically, not emotionally, calmly, clearly. Officer, I will comply. Before I step out, I want to confirm, am I being detained or am I free to leave? That one sentence does a lot more than it seems. First, it shows compliance. You're not refusing, you're not escalating, you're not challenging the officer's authority in a confrontational way. You've already said, I will comply. Second, you're asserting awareness. You're signaling that you understand your rights without waving them like a weapon. Third, and this is the part people miss, you are creating a verbal record. Even if nothing is being recorded officially, you're setting a tone that says, I am paying attention, and I understand what's happening. Now, will every officer respond the same way? No, and that's something you need to accept up front. Some officers will ignore the question completely. Some will repeat the command slightly more firmly. Step out of the car. Some will answer directly, and some might even get irritated. But here's what matters. You ask the question calmly, respectfully, and without resistance. That matters legally, and it matters psychologically. Let's talk about psychology for a second, because this is where things get really interesting. During a traffic stop, officers are constantly assessing you, not just what you say, but how you say it. Your tone, your pace, your body language, your eye movement. They're looking for signs of nervousness, aggression, deception, or unpredictability. And here's the catch. Normal nervousness often looks suspicious. A driver who's just anxious because they got pulled over might start talking too much. They might over-explain. They might laugh awkwardly. They might avoid eye contact. To an officer, that can look like someone hiding something. So when you calmly say, "I will comply," and then ask a clear, measured question, you're doing something powerful. You're breaking that pattern. You're showing control. Control is underrated in these situations. Now let's go deeper into what happens next, because stepping out of the car changes the entire dynamic. Inside your vehicle, you have a degree of separation. You're in your space. Once you step out, you're in their environment. The officer controls positioning, distance, and movement. That's why officers often ask you to step out. It gives them a tactical advantage. And again, that's not necessarily about you personally. It's about how they're trained. But here's where people start making small mistakes that turn into bigger problems. You step out quickly, maybe too quickly. Your hands aren't clearly visible. You turn around suddenly. You reach into your pocket without thinking. All of that can raise tension instantly. From the officer's perspective, they don't know what you're reaching for. They don't know your intentions. Their reaction is based on uncertainty. So if you're stepping out, do it slowly. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. And yes, this might feel exaggerated. You might think, "I'm just getting out of my car, why does it matter so much?" It matters because the roadside is one of the most unpredictable environments for law enforcement. That unpredictability shapes how they interpret even the smallest actions. Now let's talk about another layer most drivers overlook. Sometimes the request to step out of the car isn't just about safety, it's about observation. Once you're outside, the officer can watch how you stand, how you walk, how you respond to questions. This becomes especially relevant in situations involving suspected DUI, but it can apply more broadly. They might ask you simple questions. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Have you had anything to drink tonight? And here's where things get tricky. These questions feel casual. They feel conversational. But they're not random. They're designed to gather information and sometimes to create inconsistencies. If you answer quickly without thinking, you might contradict something you said earlier, or you might volunteer information that leads to more questions. This is why people unintentionally talk themselves into deeper scrutiny. And this is where your earlier question, "Am I being detained or am I free to leave?" starts to matter even more. Because if you are being detained, your rights are different than if this is just a routine stop. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Even when you ask that question, you might not get a clear answer. Officers sometimes keep things intentionally vague. Not always, but it happens. So what do you do then? You stay consistent. You comply physically, but you remain mindful verbally. If you choose to answer questions, keep it brief. If you choose not to, you can say something like, "I prefer not to answer any questions." Notice the tone there. No attitude, no hostility, just clarity. Let me give you a scenario that happens more often than people realize. The officer takes your license and registration. Minutes pass. Then more minutes. Maybe 10, maybe 15. You're sitting there wondering what's going on. Then the officer comes back, changes tone slightly and says, "Go ahead and step out of the vehicle." At this point, many drivers feel pressure. They think, if I just cooperate fully, this will end faster. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. Because once you're out of the car, the scope of the interaction can expand. They might ask for consent to search. "Do you mind if I take a look inside your vehicle?" That question is critical, because if you say yes, you've just given them permission. And once consent is given, it's very hard to take back in a meaningful way. This is another moment where people act on instinct instead of awareness. They think saying no will make them look guilty. But legally, refusing consent is your right, and it does not, by itself, establish guilt. So imagine this sequence. You're out of the car. The officer asks to search. You respond calmly, "I do not consent to any searches." No explanation, no argument, just a clear statement. Again, tone matters, delivery matters. Now, does that mean the officer will walk away? Not necessarily. They might continue asking questions. They might try to find another legal basis for a search. But you've made your position clear. Let's circle back to the original moment, because this is where everything connects. Step out of the vehicle. That's not just a command, it's a pivot point. What you say right then sets the tone for everything that follows. If you react emotionally, things can escalate quickly. If you freeze and say nothing, you lose an opportunity to establish clarity. If you argue aggressively, you risk turning a routine stop into something more serious. But if you respond with calm compliance and a precise question, you shift the dynamic in a subtle but meaningful way. And here's something most people don't realize until it's too late. Many traffic stops that go wrong don't start with major offenses. They start with small misunderstandings, poor communication, or unnecessary tension. A slightly raised voice, a sarcastic comment, a quick movement, a defensive answer. These are small things, but in a high-stress environment they carry weight. So when I tell you to say those words before stepping out of the car, it's not about sounding clever or rehearsed. It's about staying grounded. It's about keeping control of yourself even when the situation feels uncertain. Because once you lose that control, even for a moment, you're reacting instead of thinking. And that's when mistakes happen. The kind of mistakes that don't feel serious in the moment, but can have real consequences later. So the next time you see those lights in your mirror, and I hope it's a long time from now, you'll remember this moment, the pause, the command, and the choice you have in how you respond. Not louder, not smarter, just more aware. And sometimes, that awareness is the only thing separating a routine stop from a situation that goes somewhere you never expected.